Welcome back to Ready for Merge, the podcast about the evolution of Bitcoin and Ethereum. I'm your host, Christine D. Kim. Today's show is a Meet the Devs interview with one of the lead developers of a new Ethereum execution layer client called Ethrex. Before we get started with today's show, a few announcements. First, I am going to be hosting my very first meetup, in-person meetup in New York City this Friday, April 17th. It is a protocol developer happy hour, so geared towards protocol developer researchers and enthusiasts. Everyone is invited to come and discuss timely protocol development topics, similar to the topics that you would hear on this podcast show, Ready for Merge. It is the inaugural meetup for a meetup series that I hope over time will foster new connections, community, and knowledge sharing between protocol developers of all different blockchain ecosystems. So you can learn more about the event and about all protocol devs both on meetup.com and Luma. I've created 2 event invites for this Friday's happy hour. You can find it by searching up all protocol devs on meetup.com or luma.com. Second announcement, if you are interested in featuring an announcement on an upcoming Ready for Merge episode and speaking directly to an audience of protocol developers and enthusiasts, please do reach out via the email listed in the show notes of today's episode. Now, onwards with today's show.
So my name is Tomás. I'm Argentinian, currently living in Barcelona. I am one of the tech leads at Ethrex, which is a project in the company Lambda Class. And we do an execution client, which is mostly for L1, but also with L2 capabilities.
And what would you say has been your biggest contribution to Ethereum so far in your career?
So I would say Ethrex is my biggest contribution, but we also participated before in building a consensus client called just Elixir Lambda Consensus Client. This was a very interesting effort a couple of years ago in an EPF, the Ethereum Protocol Fellowship. We got we got selected as fellows, two of my teammates and I, and along Paul, another fellow at the 4th cohort, we got selected for it and built it in, I would say, about 6 months or so. And we got something working. It was not as performant as Ethrex, but it was a very nice introduction and a nice contribution as well to Ethereum.
Why did you end up building Ethrex and execution layer client? What happened there?
So Lambda Class is originally more of a distributed systems company, and consensus is the part that we are usually more associated with. However, we moved into execution because that's where we think that most of the gaps or things to improve are there in Ethereum in general. Consensus has a lot of things, but I think that most of them are already covered in the roadmap. For instance, you have like 3-second slots and stuff like that in the lean roadmap. And for execution, we saw more opportunity for us to build something that was completely different to others.
Let's get a bit of background on who you are, Tomás, and how you got involved in this crazy world of crypto. Before you joined Lambda Class, what were you doing? What were your passions?
So I started studying computer engineering back in 2013. At that time, I was mostly interested in video games. But eventually, I got into robotics. I previously worked at a different Argentinian company that was working with both robotics and mobile sensors, data collection to train sensors so that you could so that mobile phones could recognize the kind of gestures that you did, and with that, activate certain features. Eventually, I started a cooperation between myself, a couple of members of Lambda Class for a different project that was more related to backends and this is a very long story, but it was a backend for a tourism application in the Argentinian government. And after that, I actually started working full time with Lambda. And at the time, we started in the application layer of Ethereum and eventually slowly moved into the protocol.
Interesting. And for our listeners, you had mentioned Lambda Class focuses on distributed systems. Can you elaborate on what Lambda Class is?
It's a good question. It's a hard to define company. Sometimes people define it as a software boutique, which is it especially in the past, is it used to provide services, but for very niche and specific things. For instance, stuff related to high frequency bidding, which is something that happens in the backend for announcements in the web. And there have been, and we have started with crypto pretty early on, even if it was not the first thing that the company did. So, for instance, when we started in cryptography, we didn't get into either building smart contracts or even the nodes. We started building cryptography and VMs. So one of the first projects that we tackled on, for instance, was the Cairo VM in Rust. They already had an implementation in Python, which was amazing, but it wasn't the most performant just because of the language. And some of our team members did the first implementation in Rust for it. So that was our like head-on approach to what we wanted to do in crypto.
And how did the Cairo VM project ultimately lead to Ethrex, the EL client? Tell me about the journey of deciding that this is something that is worth your time.
Oh, that's a great question, and it's also not trivial because it's working in an execution client is a little bit different to providing services to someone else, right? When you work in a client like this, you're working in public goods, and you don't necessarily have external funding. So if you think about it, this is fully an investment by the company. And what we're getting out of this is, first of all, training. One of the biggest ways in which you can train people to know what the protocol is about is actually building something into protocol. Going way back into how the company handled things back in the day, people studied crypto in general by building Bitcoin clients in Rust. So it was a mixed effort between learning Rust and also learning a little bit about crypto, learning about signatures. Building a Bitcoin client is orders of magnitude simpler than building an Ethereum client. And we thought that this was like the natural next step. But also, we saw that we had an opportunity to provide a couple of new things. We come from a background where simplicity is kind of the core of what we do. We wanted to do something that was very easy to read, very easy to follow, and thus very secure. We think that if you're easy to read all of the code from the main function, go to where the servers are created, follow the handlers, go down the like blockchain storage, and then even into the LEVM, which is our implementation of the EVM, and you can do this in one take without needing like external assistant or heavy reading of documentation, then you build something that will be easy to debug in the future if you have any kind of errors. And also, if you have a shorter amount of lines of code, you are also able to have something that will probably have less errors because we see code as a liability, not as something that's good in itself. Code is a necessary evil. We love coding. We do not love code itself. So in the way that we think about this is if you have a 90,000 lines of code client, which is our case, you're probably going to have a better time when you have troubles than if you have to debug like 400,000 or 500,000 lines of code, which is something that can happen sometimes in different projects. Um, so we both wanted to do the simplest thing possible that worked at first, and also at the same time trying to avoid things like traits and macros and even generic sometimes like the plague, which are like these are Rust features that are extremely powerful, but they also usually lead you to if you don't handle them correctly, they lead you to overgeneralization and troubles like that. We wanted to do something. I think that we have about maybe 5 traits, maybe 6 in the whole data in the whole code base, and they are mostly to be able to have different types of databases injected, and that's it. But we try not to do that for structural types like blocks or for transactions and stuff like that. And the reason why we do this is, as I said before, we just wanted to make it the simplest possible to read.
How do you deal then with the complexity that is inherent with the Ethereum specs? Because the way that Ethereum developers are upgrading Ethereum, it's not really removing code, it's adding tons and tons more code. If you think about the merge, they added a whole new protocol to the existing protocol. When we think about EPBS that's being developed right now, there are so many aspects of Ethereum that is very ambiguous and constantly evolving. How do you maintain simplicity with an extremely, extremely complex protocol?
No, that's one of our biggest challenges. We try to follow the philosophy by Joe Armstrong a lot. Joe Armstrong is the creator of Erlang. This is one of our favorite languages at Lambda Class. It was used, I think it was built by Joe Armstrong while he was at the Ericsson company for the firmware for like backbone routers. And what he used to say was, make it work, then make it beautiful. And then if you really, really have to, make it fast. But if you make it beautiful, it's usually very fast already. So just really make it beautiful. And the reason why this has been very, very helpful for us is because we always have something working and production ready before we move into making it performant, which is what we did. Originally, I think that we had a working prototype in the first 6 months or so. And then after that, we started making it performant. But the first thing we did is, okay, we built this, then we simplified and remove redundancy. And then we build a little bit again and then remove redundancy. And you would say, okay, this is a nice way to work in general, but how does this solve with Ethereum inherent complexities, right? The short answer is it doesn't. You cannot remove inherent complexity at all. I think that one of the things we tried to achieve was try to make that complexity explicit and not hide it. I think that one of the typical things that as a software developer we try to do is hide the complexity for the end user, and that part is fine. But when you start hiding complexity for your own coders, which is something that usually happens if you're not very careful about it, you start overusing either traits or generics or tools like that in order to not be able, in order so that you are not able to see like long chains of if statements and stuff like that. And what we usually do is try to do the opposite. You should be able to go into a piece of code and say, oh, so for the Fulu fork, this was like this, and for Amsterdam, this was like this. And I don't want to have a executable idea thing that then if you look at 3 or 5 different files, you end up seeing, oh, okay, so this is actually something that changes per fork, and I have very separate files all over the place in order to be able to follow all of these code dependencies. I think that there are some clients that do this very well. I think that Geth is a great example of that in some cases. They have some places, for instance, in block addition, like when you add a new block, where they are very explicit about the way they do things. This is also something that Go language is usually very good for, because you don't have that like high level abstractions that could end up as traps for you. So we try to apply those same ideas of simplicity to our own client.
Are there any other key differences or characteristics of Ethrex that you would say differentiate Ethrex from the other clients like Geth?
Yeah, so I think that we have 2 more main differences. One of them is that we started even as a very roll-up focused client. So we want to be very performant in L1, but also we want to provide support for people starting their own rollups so that they don't need anything aside from Ethrex, right? Usually when you start working in your own rollup, the first thing you have to do is download all of the L1 infrastructure and then download some modified L2 so modified L1 client so that you can start on your L2. And we wanted to simplify all of that process. And we also wanted to have all of the primitives included so that people didn't have to do the cryptography themselves. So we have our own research team called LambdaWorks that they work in the cryptography primitives, like BLS signatures, and all of the things that currently are used in the EVM. They have some support for all of those. But the main reason I'm mentioning them is because our main approach for L2s and rollups in general is ZK proving, and then verification in the L1. So all of that is included. If you just clone the repo, you already have access for that. And you can build your own rollup with ZK capabilities from the get-go. We also have this in our roadmap. We have done some work on it, but it's not something that we have today. We also want to add capabilities for based rollups in Ethrex. The idea would be that, again, if you want to do your own base rollup, you just download the Ethrex repo and then you do some configuration and follow the specs, follow the docs, and you're able to just spin it up, which is something that you already can do with L2s. We have a couple of people using that in their own L2s as of today. We already did some effort in base rollups with Gattaca last year. We were able to launch something for optimism using base rollups and reconfirmations. We can talk about a little bit more later when we talk about the roadmap and what I think would be some of the great things to move on afterwards. But so on the one hand, when you ask me, okay, what are for Ethrex the main differentiators? One of them is simplicity. One of them is L2 support. And the third one, I would say, is that we try to do experimental things first. And when I say first, I don't mean first with related to other clients. When I say first is, I think that usually we have this philosophy in general for all of our projects. But as I mentioned before, we want to have something working first before we drive the discussion. And there are several things in the Ethereum roadmap where there are a lot of nitty-gritty details that usually are solved via research. And we are all in favor of research, but sometimes you can get stuck in research if clients are not the ones already implementing those details to begin with. So what happens sometimes is that there might be some disconnect between the research teams and the client teams. And one of our goals, and one of the reasons why we started building this, is so that we can close that gap a little bit. We have been working a lot lately in the last month or so in some experimental EIPs. We did some proof of concepts that are already working for native rollups, for optional proving, for binary trees, for frame transactions. So those are all things that are not yet included into any fork. They are not for Amsterdam or even for Hegota, which is the following one. But the discussion is already happening because they are, or sometimes the devs and the researchers are already wondering if there are some of these things that we can include in the Hegota fork. But I would say I wouldn't consider myself capable of discussing, for instance, frame transactions if we didn't have even a small implementation of it, even if it is not a full one. And usually that's the way we do things. So I would say that that's one of the things that differentiate us from other clients nowadays. I wouldn't think that's a feature per se. It's more of a client methodology thing. But
from my perspective, client teams have so many parallel work that they have to do. So, for example, currently, at the time of this recording, client teams are working on Glamsterdam. They're working on scoping out Hegota with figuring out all these other EIPs, whether it should be in the fork, out of the fork. They're working on cleanup that's still happening from Fusaka, so enabling non-consensus breaking changes on their clients to improve Blob, the way that Blob transactions are being propagated. There's ongoing efforts when it comes to increases in the block gas limit, testing these, in even trying to push these increases before the next fork. There's so many things that client teams are focused on, requiring to do. How do you find the time and the resources to implement all of these experimental EIPs that you don't even know will get into a fork?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things into that. On the one hand, you have to prioritize, and we usually prioritize what we think are the EIPs that will drive the most change to the Ethereum ecosystem. So I mentioned before frame transactions and native rollups. We started getting into those. On the one hand, some researchers in the EF reached out to us, so that helped us prioritize as well. But for us, the most important things in the roadmap are on the UX, and being able to have cheap verification. So that drove us to prioritize those over other potential experiments. That on the one hand. On the other, regarding resources, I think that I'm not sure how other client teams manage their resources, so I cannot have an opinion on that. But in Lambda Class particularly, what we usually do is that we have a very flexible team. So if we have when we started coding Ethrex, we were about 30 people, which is a pretty big team. And we did that just so that we were able to build everything in a short period of time. Once the Ethrex project was finished, in a way, it's never finished, right, because of the upgrades. But once it was productive and performant, we split the teams into many efforts. And what we do is that if we get a high load, we usually get some of the people from that original built Ethrex that are now in different projects and make them come back for a couple of weeks, and then we release them again. So this is more of a company policy thing, but we have many people working in different L2s, in different products that are built on top of Ethrex, which is also kind of one of the pros of having built a client, right? That you get to build things on top of it, and you really already know how all of the underlying infrastructure works. So yeah, for us, it's just as simple as like bringing more people and then letting them go to their projects again. But prioritization is our biggest thing, making sure that we are tackling the EIPs that are the most important for us.
I guess also on a broader level, it's also about prioritizing what is the most important thing for Ethereum right now? Is it cleaning up
Yeah.
tech debt? Is it addressing post quantum? Is it improving the UX? And I'm glad that you mentioned frame transactions because there seems to be quite a bit of disagreement right now in the Ethereum community about what the priority should be for Ethereum developers. In your view and in Ethrex's view, what is the priority for Ethereum right now?
Yeah. So I think that the priority for Ethereum right now is to make it as usable as possible so that people can actually start using it. Last week, FCC happened, and one of the things that I chatted about with a lot of people there was that one of the main problems in these events is that you see a lot of people that are trying to make it better for the people that are already using it, but they are not sometimes making a big effort to make it usable for the broader audience. So ideally, and this is probably talking a little bit more into the following years than our current situation, you would have Ethereum as something that you don't know exists. It just works under whatever system you're building, right? The same way that when you're building a paymaster application in Web 2, you don't really pay attention to the details of how VisaNet works. You're just paying attention to some layer that's built on top of it, and you can already use that. One of the main use cases in countries like Argentina, for instance, for crypto, is stable coins, right? So this is a highly, highly bigger conversation. But the short version is that in countries in Europe, usually crypto is seen more of an investment, and in countries like Argentina, it's usually more seen as a way to have stable money, because like Argentinian economy is famous for not being very stable, right? I come from there, so I can't really talk about into it. Um,
You would
but the thing
know.
that I would know, yeah. So the thing is that people usually see crypto as a way to have access to stable coins. And so there's a lot of opportunity there and in other countries as well to have a very big amount of people coming to the Ethereum ecosystem. And one of the main failing parts or the main gaps between our current system and what would be ideal is that people need to get ETH on their hands, right? So if someone gets paid in USDC, for instance, the first thing that they need to do is first have a wallet, have all of their have their seed phrase taken note up somewhere. Then afterwards, they need to get ETH, because even if they got paid in USDC, they cannot do anything with it. So they have to roll up into a centralized exchange typically and do the KYC, and then they have to buy some ETH and learn how to do so. I think that some of the old school Bitcoin guys would say, hey, that's necessary and that's probably something that you want. That's actually a feature. People need to understand what they're doing. And I think this is more of a personal opinion, but I think that's only useful for like a very small section of the population. If you actually want this ecosystem to grow and be the world computer and be something that drives the economy and is actually used, you need to have that be a detail of implementation that is not seen by final users unless they want to. And in that regard, account abstractions is one of the biggest things. You need people to be able to have subsidized transactions so that they can use USDC without requiring to buy ETH from a centralized exchange. And then we go back all the way to Flame transactions. So is Flame transactions a necessity? By no means. What we have an opinion as a base necessity is account abstractions. You need it in whatever native shape or form you can to be able to have these use cases without needing all of the process to get people in the system. Ideally, you just have some app that doesn't even have to have wallet in its title. It's just an application for payments. And you have some people receive US dollars or euros or whatever they receive in their country, and then be able to trade that and be able to also provide some proof of whatever regulations are in your country, like tax payments, or that you're able to use these apps without needing to have the whole KYC procedure. So this is a short segue into a different topic, but one of the rollups that we support is Sobra, which is an identity provider in Argentina. And their whole thing is that they allow you to not need to do KYC by having a proof that you are already a person with identified. They are an identity manager. And that's the kind of use cases that we're trying to drive. And they work fully on top of Ethrex. So the kind of things that we expect Ethereum to have a big improvements in the next couple of years are building all of the necessary tools so that the financial ecosystem that I wouldn't say smoothly, but works on the classical payment systems also work in Ethereum. And after that happens, everything else will kind of fall into place.
How much agency do you think Ethrex has in shaping these decisions when it comes to, I appreciate, your explanation of what you think should be prioritized in the Ethereum roadmap. In your week to week, day to day, when you're involved in these calls, like how much of the work that's going into Ethrex is simply carrying out the decisions that were made on these calls versus Ethrex actually shaping and making reality, making Ethereum evolve in the way that you guys see it should?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it's very challenging in general for a new client to be able to shape the way things work in Ethereum. Um, I think that for us, we have two separate ways of doing this. On the one hand, we work with clients, like with our L2 clients, and that's already a way of shaping Ethereum in a way. But when we are talking about protocol decisions, then I think that's the most challenging part for us. We started participating in ACDEs and ACDC calls about at some point last year, but we are trying to be more vocal right now, and we are trying to get our vote in a way. I think that all core devs calls are one of the key opportunities to do that. At the same time, I think that there are some things in the process that could be improved in order to make the participation of new clients, I wouldn't say easier, but more clear. Right now, I wouldn't there's a whole big discussion about what are the entry conditions for a new client. And we're seeing those more in the Lean ecosystem than in the L1 Ethereum ecosystem. Because in Lean, all of the clients are new clients, right? So they have a whole separate set of problems. But in our case, I would say that the current system is a little bit too vibe based, and we need something a little bit more like I would appreciate if we would have a little bit more clear entry conditions, right? So sometimes stake in some client is mentioned, sometimes some EIPs are mentioned, sometimes performance is mentioned. I think that what would be great is to say, hey, if you have this amount of stake in the Ethereum ecosystem, or if you have these EIPs and you're up to date, or if you have this amount of, I don't know, hours or days or weeks working in DevNets and your client has not gone down in the latest DevNets, then you have a place. And all of these are different, completely different and valid. So I'm not trying to condition which is the entry condition. What I would like is to have some clarity, right? Because after you get that, you already know, okay, this is the path for me to participate and have a say in the Ethereum roadmap, in the
Do you
formal
think,
aspect of it, at least.
I mean, I don't know. Do you think that having formalized requirements would prevent large segments of the ecosystem from being able to have a say in Ethereum protocol development? Do you think that's a feature, I guess, to just cut out? Like, let's just say there's 10 clients and the requirements are 5 of them meet them, the other 5 don't. Like, is it a feature that like those 5 are just kind of cut loose?
No, that's a great question. So I think that open participation is key, but you have two separate things. So nowadays, something that is mixed in all core devs in general is discussion and decision, right? So I think that discussion should always be open, and like it's very much appreciated when both researchers and client devs and people from wallet teams and staking systems can participate, give their opinion and their feedback, and try to propose ideas, etc. I think that the most complicated part is not discussion in itself. I think that works pretty well in general in the Ethereum ecosystem. I think that the decision making is the part that is less defined in a way. And bear in mind, this is not against any particular person. I think that they're all doing a great work, and it's a very hard position to occupy. Um, but if I wanted to say what's the part of the process that I would try to improve the most for decision making would be this: like, what does voting means? Does voting even exist? And who votes? So I think that if we get that in place, then it would be a bit more clear for new clients to know when is the time to have a I wouldn't have a word. We already have a word, thanks to all of the coordinators, or Ansgar, Nixo, all of the, and Team Bako in its time. They all have allowed us to have a saying. They all have invited us to protocol meetings, and we are very glad that we were able to participate last week on HCC in all of those events. So they are really giving us a space, and that's very much appreciated. What we would like is just a bit more clarity on decision making and when one gets the participation in that part.
Yeah. For better, for worse, I will say that on these calls, more often now, I hear discussion happening around a contentious decision, and then the call moderator being like, okay, let's take a vote with the client teams, like 5
Yes.
4, 4 against, 2 4, like 1 against. That's not enough consensus. Like almost naturally, like these call moderators seeking like black and white framework for making a decision, a no, yes, go decision, and leaning on one client team, one vote, and weighing them in that way, which is interesting because nobody ever voted on those requirements, or no one ever said that that's the way that decisions will be made. But naturally, in times of contention, this is the process that is resulting, that is coming out and being, I would say, like more becoming more concrete.
Yes. Yes. And I think that that's a great thing. Having people explicitly say what they want and being able to at least do a temperature check, as they usually call it, is a great progress towards having this improved.
Hmm. And looking ahead, you had mentioned this already a little bit earlier on in our interview, but and maybe the answer is framework transactions, but I'd love to know a little bit more, like when you look ahead to the roadmap for the Ethereum protocol, what are you most excited about in terms of the next big feature, next big improvement for your Ethrex users?
Yeah. So what I'm the most excited about is a little bit less controversial. Is block access lists. Is the
Oh,
BAL feature. I think that that was one of the greatest things that was planned in the Ethereum roadmap last year. Um, as I said before, we come from a very like performance focused team, and having something that allows you to reuse all of the computation that has already happened, so that you already know what to look, where to look, and have all of that very heavily optimized, is one of the things that I think Ethereum was kind of, I wouldn't say lacking, but wasn't prioritizing a couple of years ago. And having those discussions being driven by people like Tony Barstatter and people like that is a very nice breath of fresh air. So we already implemented it along as all of the other clients that are participating in the Valnet DevNet, and we are seeing huge improvements in performance, like maybe depending on the blocks, like 2x, 4x levels of improvement, and things that we weren't able to see in the last couple of years. So I'm very, very happy about it.
on the topic of block level access lists, when are we going to
Yeah.
be able to see that activated on mainnet?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. I would assume that would happen at some point in July, maybe. But that is highly dependent on, I mean, I think that all of the clients have something productive as of now. The ValDevNet is working pretty well. Well, I would say that ValDevNet 3 had its hiccups, but ValDevNet 2 was being very, very stable. And for us, it's been like very smooth sailing for the beginning. I think that for now, the biggest blocker point for Glamsterdam is more on the consensus side. I think that EPBS is kind of having some more difficulties that PAL. But again, I'm like very biased because we are kind of okay with BAL ourselves. We don't have big issues for now. So I might not be the right person to ask about it. Uh, so for us, we're kind of confident in it, and we don't see any other things in the Amsterdam in the execution part that are very, very challenging. We do see EPBS as something that's extremely complex and challenging, and we're like we ourselves are not working in it. But if we were, we kind of estimate it, and it's a way complex, more complex thing that pulse, for instance. So yeah, I think that probably the main blockers are on the consensus side. If you ask me, you would need to ask the other execution clients what they think about
You
it.
haven't been coming up against any challenges with the gas repricing EIPs when it comes to the dynamic or variable pricing for state gas changes? I've been hearing on these calls that client teams are struggling with EIP 8037. You tell me if that's false.
No, that's a great question. I think that there's two parts to this. On the one hand, there's a challenging part, which is the discussion in itself. If you watch the Discord channels, there are people like really struggling, and this is they're struggling to see what's the correct path, right? So what is the correct solution? But once the correct solution is defined, implementing is not that hard.
Gotcha.
So I think that from if you have that perspective, I can really agree with you in the sense that there are some gaps still to be defined on how we will do things in Amsterdam that are probably challenging. Um, but we are in April the 10th, so I cannot see why we wouldn't have. Yeah, mainnet is too optimist, but I wouldn't see why we cannot have like all of the test nets at least in July, for instance. At least for the execution part.
Ambitious, but I'll take it. I'll
Yeah.
take it. Thank you for the thoughts. Okay, so you shared a little bit about future changes in the protocol level. I want to dig deeper into what you had mentioned about having support for even-based rollups and what that might mean for Ethrex as a client roadmap. Tell me a little bit about the big like projects or milestones that you guys might add to your portfolio.
Yeah. So Lambda Class is pretty ambitious in that sense. So we usually have many things at the same time. As I mentioned before, we already built a small version of a consensus client. And when I say small, I mean it was fully working, but it wasn't as performant. But seeing where things are going, we already started reworking that consensus client that we already built a couple of years ago, some months ago. And it's already upgraded to latest forks. And we had very horrible numbers. I think that we had every block was processed in about like 10 seconds, which is of course very big, but we already got it down to 1 second or so, which is still not enough, but closer to the like maybe 300 milliseconds or so that are actually more acceptable for this. Um, so we have some people working on that. We also have a couple of people working on Lambda, which is a lean consensus client built in Rust. So we have both of those efforts in parallel. So the current consensus client would be able to be deployed as of now, and the Lambda client, which is a lean consensus client, is already in production, with what lean is today, right? Which is very, very small. So we're already participating in those efforts. I think that currently Lambda is the most used client in the lean devnets, which is a huge milestone for us. We were very happy about it. It's one of the most stable ones. And we are very happy about everything that's happening with the XMSS signature ideas, all of the post-quantum security primitives that are being added. Our cryptography team is very happy to be able to participate in that as well. And related to like more product-facing features, yeah, we do see a future in based rollups. At some point, we wanted to build our own based rollup with certain rules. That was not deprecated, but deprioritized because we started working more on having Ethrex up to the latest fork and performance, etc. But we will definitely go back to it at some point. And the way we see it is the fastest we can get our like actual clients to be able to access pre-confirmations and stuff that allows users to have like millisecond ideas of commitment that they already have their funds. That's the better. So whatever tools we can build to get us there, we are happy to work on them. And base rollups is one of them, and the ZK rollups is one of them, and frame transactions is one of them. So we are like really giving it our all to those ideas.
Mm. And like you said, it's about priorities and prioritization. So it's what your priorities are now. It could maybe shift a little in the future too.
Yeah, always happens.
Mm.
But
And is
usually,
yeah.
usually if they do, it's because something more interesting and that solves the problem better arises.
Mm. I am always astounded by how every couple years, if not every year, there's a new roadmap, like a new
Yeah,
5-year plan. We have the straw map now, but 2 years ago it was like Vitalik's little, I don't know what he shared on Twitter. So every time I'm like, oh, we got a new prioritization.
true.
um, for Ethrex, would you say that right now the user profile, the primary users of Ethrex, are they layer twos?
Yes, for sure. I think that for now, our biggest priority is L2s. We already have a couple of actual clients there. Um, in L1, we want to be really performant so that stakers and builders are able to use it. We already have some stakers that use it, but we are not big in the in the staker community yet. And that's very understandable. Stakers usually they really have skin in the game. They have there's a lot of stake in place there, and they are very interesting people, but because they usually test everything a lot. So they have been already testing Ethrex very early on. Um, but at the same time, actual adoption takes a lot of time. So the things that we need to work the most on there is resources and stability. Some of the feedback that we got from the staking community was that sometimes when they did some restarts, they had some trouble bringing Ethrex again in a very short amount of time. And we realized, hey, that's something that we really need to work on. And we already had address some of those issues, and we'll be releasing our 10th release probably next week or so with all of those things. So yeah, we're also trying to keep stakers happy. But for now, our biggest priority is L2s.
Hmm. That's exciting, though. Congratulations on being ready to do your 10th. Is it the 10th major release for Ethrex?
Yeah, I mean, our our versioning system is a little bit unorthodox, but it's our 10th release, and it's mostly about performance changes. But the most important thing are related to stability. So we just addressed a lot of things that were related to restarts, a lot of things that were related to networking, and being able to have less resources consumed, even more than performance.
Hmm. I appreciate your time, Tomás, and coming on the show. I have a bit of a tradition when it comes to these interviews, these Meet the Devs interviews, and that is a rapid fire question round where I ask you a bunch of questions that I haven't shared with you in advance, but would love to get your rapid fire takes, just short, quick kind of takes on whatever's the first thing that pops into your head.
Awesome, yeah, go for it.
Okay. The first rapid fire question is, what do you like most about working on Ethereum?
Oh, wow. That's a very general one. So
It is.
I think that I think the technology is very interesting and the potential is huge. If this ecosystem goes like actually big and to a broader ecosystem, opportunities are endless.
Second rapid fire question, what do you dislike the most about working on Ethereum?
I think about working in Ethereum, the most complicated part is starting. I think that both getting your client accepted and also just trying to wrap your head up about everything. There's not a single source of truth aside from the specs, and specs are sometimes very built for people that are already have built this for a long period of time.
Hmm. What's an area of Ethereum development you wish that more people would start contributing to?
Oh, protocol for sure, client teams. So I think that external builders, even if they are not very knowledgeable to Ethereum, they should read and contribute to clients. Um, Both because their contributions are appreciated and because that's the best way to learn some of the things on the
Mm.
protocol.
What do you wish someone told you about jumping into Ethereum development that you wish you knew before you got into it?
Hmm. Yeah. Gotta read the specs, man. You gotta do it.
Specs are important. What's something about the way that Ethereum as a protocol evolves and changes that you wish more people knew about?
It's very nonlinear. It goes back and forth, and there's also a lot of distributed decision making. And the hardest part is that you have a lot of different teams, and they have, understandably, different opinions on it. So it's very democratic. It's very nice. It's also very tricky.
Hmm. What do you think is the most necessary character trait to be a full-time developer on Ethereum?
I would say stubbornness. Like you have to get through some things, eventually understand the whole thing. You have to have, if you're interested enough in it, you probably you can replace a stubbornness with passion, but you really need to get through a lot until you start getting the bigger picture. And when you start getting the bigger picture, everything becomes way easier.
Mm. Last rapid fire question. If you weren't working on Ethereum, is there another open source project that you would want to contribute to?
Hmm. So if I wasn't working in crypto in general and I was trying to work in something open source related, I would probably work in Godot or one of those video game engine systems that are open source and very interesting. Yeah, I would go into
Mm,
one of those.
very cool. Very cool. That concludes the rapid fire section. That was great, Tomas.
Very fun.
Some of those questions are really hard.
Yeah.
But yeah, that just about wraps all the questions that I had for you on this Meet the Devs interview. Was there anything else that you wanted to share or say before we wrap up our time together?
No, it was a pleasure meeting you, and it was great participating in the podcast.
Great. Well, it was a pleasure to have you on the show, Tomás, and I hope to have you back. Thank you also to all of our listeners for this episode of Ready for Merge. I'm Christine D. Kim, the host of Ready for Merge and the Meet the Devs mini-series. All the information shared in today's episode and this series is strictly for informational purposes. Nothing communicated constitutes investment advice and offer, recommendation, or solicitation to buy or sell any securities. The interview that you just heard with Tomás, we recorded this on April 10th, 2026. You can find out more information about Tomás, the Ethrex client, Lambda Class in the show notes of today's episode. Thank you again for listening. Stay tuned for a new episode of Ready for Merge next week. I'll talk to you guys then. Bye.